G'day and welcome to The Good Source. Tonight this channel is bringing you a program called Not Q&A because we are the cure to the echo chamber which prevails in the lying harlot media of various channels. There's lots of good journalists there, but far out, it's hard to get some truth out of them sometimes. Welcome to Not Q&A, Lyle. Thank you for joining me.
Pleasure, Dave. Yes, we need to go to alternative sources more and more. The mainstream media cannot be trusted. That's why we're here.
Yep, absolutely. Also welcoming fellow Good Source commentator Damian Coory. How are you, Damian?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys?
Also welcoming fellow Good Source commentator.
Got a bit of echo there.
Damian Coory.
For some reason.
How are you, Damian?
I'm good, thank you. How are you guys?
Also welcoming fellow Good Source.
Something went wrong.
All right, we're going to try and figure that out. Can we hear an echo still now? Testing.
No, we're good.
All right. Damian, you are stuck in transit between Melbourne and your home in Brisbane, just stone's throw short of the New South Wales border.
I am, yeah. It's an interesting situation. Not to want to sort of put too much focus on my personal case, because I think there are a lot of other people out there who are suffering much, much more than I am. We've got businesses that are going bust or being affected, have got funerals and weddings that have had to cancel or move or can't get to, perhaps interstate. Yeah. We have a serious problem in this country, I think. Basically, you know, I left Melbourne on Friday. I'd gone down there on Thursday for some business meetings and to see the studio at Discernible, to meet with Matt Wong, talking about my podcast, The Other Side. We had lunch, recorded an interview, had dinner, and then I went back to my hotel room, woke up the next morning to the news that Dan might shut the state. So decided until further notice, I was supposed to join Matt for an event on Friday night in Melbourne, which is part of the reason I went down there, and I couldn't attend the event, nor could one other participant. I got into New South Wales okay because the border wasn't closed and it was well before the lockdown. I'm trying to abide by the law, but the law keeps changing by the minute. I spent, I kept myself relatively isolated in New South Wales on the advice that was the director of the New South Wales government, was 5 days in isolation. If you can do that, it's not easy to do when you're on the road and you're away from home. But I did my best there, stayed away from going into any restaurants or anything, wore a mask where I could, stayed on the road, stopped for fuel, did that sort of thing. Got to northern New South Wales, and now Melbourne has lifted the restriction, but Queensland hasn't. So if you've been in Victoria or in Melbourne, Greater Melbourne, at any time since February the 7th, you are required by law to go into a government quarantine for 14 days at your own expense. So for me to return home and see my children and be in my own home with my family in what is supposed to be a free, united country, not a collection of independent states, I am required to put myself into a government-controlled quarantine for 14 days because I happen to spend 16 hours in Melbourne.
Anyway, we hate this authoritarian rubbish. Let's welcome our other guests. Tonight in the comments we see Mac Attack, Entropic Dissident, which is an interesting name, Pearl Miller, much more traditional, thank you, Pearl, and Caleb, and David Bell. You can probably tell David's a man of distinction, good taste, intelligence, and dashing fine looks. Just guessing from the name, of course. But more handsome than any David I've ever met before is Ray Rudowski, our North America correspondent. Ray, so good to have you on Not Q&A tonight. Welcome to The Good Source.
Greetings from Hong Kong. Thank you for having me again.
How does a North America expert stay based in Hong Kong? You're actually just a world traveler, citizen of the world, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm basically your basic international man of mystery up here. I was a journalist for 5 years. So after working in Canada, I came here in 1995. And then Damian and I started working together and building a kind of crisis practice for 10 years. And then we started working together again at another agency. So in terms of what I'm doing, I'm counseling clients in both messaging, crisis, as well as kind of understanding and making sense of the media and media stories, what's happening, helping clients to develop media tracking, because it's really tough if they're trying to kind of report back to their head office in France or in the UK, and all they're getting is one source of information, and they're afraid to read other sources because they might be bad or propaganda or something like that, instead of just broadening out their understanding of what's actually happening in Hong Kong and the region by looking at a variety of different media sources. So that's something that I'm doing. Yeah.
Now, I want to encourage our viewers tonight, jump into the conversation, leave your comments, questions, your thoughts. You might get them on the screen if they're half civil, half sincere, half intelligent. In fact, if they're highly controversial and offensive, they might even just get on the screen anyway. But I want to encourage you that with the shutdown of news media in Australia, care of Facebook, it's more important than ever that you subscribe to the Good Source newsletter, as well as the newsletters of the various independent media outlets that you want to hear from. It's, of course, important to, as always, put your hand in your pocket and support those channels that you want to see more of. I've got subscription to various papers, not suffering a lack of revenue because they can't reach me through Facebook, and I really appreciate all the good source supporters that are helping us to keep producing shows like this. But right now, if you can, would you just share this on your Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook, because they're not going to show a link from the Good Source. So if you can share your YouTube link or Facebook link wherever you might be watching, you can watch us on the YouTube links from the Dave Pellowe channel and the Good Source channel. And you can, and although they've shut down the Good Source Facebook channel, they haven't shut down our independent individual Facebook pages. Has yours been shut down? Mine hasn't.
No. My Facebook page still exists. I checked today. Blogs that I've been putting up are still there. So
now, has somebody else verified that? Because I can see the Good Source stuff because I'm logged in as an administrator, but nobody else can.
I haven't checked on my own. My blogs were still appearing in my Facebook feed. I'm aware of other organisations that blog and use Facebook as a distribution channel. They weren't, mainstream like Sky News or the Australian, but their blogs were being censored today.
One of the ones
Facebook's, and I can name, what one organisation was Advance Australia. So all of their blogs.
Another one is Life Choice Australia, a university pro-choice group club.
Yeah. This hasn't been ridiculous against conservatives like we've seen in the US with Twitter and closed down a Parler. But nonetheless, it's really disturbing to see the flexing of the muscle of big tech against a national government. They're saying, no, we're bigger than the Morrison government. We're going to punish you for bringing in laws that we don't like. And I've been reflecting on this today. I think this is going to make Facebook very unpopular amongst a lot of people. It's annoying a lot of us. And I think it will create an impetus for alternative platforms to be created. And the sooner, the better that this monopoly is broken up. I think. I even think perhaps the ABC or a good portion of the ABC's resources should be deployed to create a public utility, free speech platform that isn't beholden to the tech oligarchs.
Absolutely. Ray, what's your thoughts on the shutdown? There's a wider story here, of course, about media freedom, journalism, and censorship, and let's get into the international contexts a little bit later. But what does this look like from an outsider's perspective?
Well, I'll kind of sum it up by looking at it, because this has been sort of rolling around the world, from the situation in the United States following the election and the deplatforming or the banning of the president of the United States, and the outrage that caused within the country and globally. But it brought up Darren Beattie, who is a contributing journalist or founder of Revolver News, pointed out on one of his appearances on Steve Bannon's podcast that in China you have a state-run media, but in the West you have a media-run state. And I think that what you're seeing is the fact that these platforms were supposed to be places where everybody could come and share ideas. And now they're starting to pick, like, we like this idea, we will fund this particular group. But they're actually starting to shut down discussions that don't fit with their worldview or their political agenda. And then on top of all of this, you've got countries that were considered pariah states, authoritarian states. I was just reading before I joined the podcast, the Russian Foreign Ministry transcript. And there's a whole section in there where the Russian Foreign Ministry condemns the Biden administration for, quote, persecuting Trump supporters. So it's like a world gone mad in which, or like a Bond movie where suddenly instead of the evil villain controlling water, it's like the evil villain controlling information flow. And that, I think, is really kind of strange, because from the outside point of view, like looking at it, in terms of what's going on in Australia, it's like, wait a second, aren't you supposed to be a democracy? Meanwhile, Australia is condemning China and some of the changes that are taking place in Hong Kong. But the moral authority of the West, I think, is declining simply because they're doing exactly what they've criticized, Russia, China, and some of these other so-called authoritarian states, while doing exactly the same thing. And then on top of this, you've got this unelected monopoly in the form of big tech, Google tweet face, that sort of runs things based around their worldview. And then again, just to sort of sum this comment up, there was this huge uproar on Twitter immediately following the ban of President Trump when Uganda, in the midst of some elections there in January, shut down Twitter. And then Jack Dorsey put out a statement saying that this was grossly unfair and it was limiting discussion and political discussion. So none of this makes any sense. And it doesn't look like big tech doesn't care that it's not accountable or that it's seen as critical.
I love the comment that you said there. I mean, it's actually profound, and I want to explore it a little bit more. And AMP McRobert picked up on it. Media run state. You spoke about China having a state-run media, and then contrasting that with the phrase media run state. What do you mean by a media run state?
Well, first of all, that's not my comment. That was Darren Beattie. But I think that
we'll give you credit for it.
I've started to inject it into a lot of my commentary, because I think that it really sums up the fact that you've got this unelected corporate body that controls a very important resource. And in this day and age, that resource is the free flow of information. And a lot of individuals and companies base their livelihoods around that free flow of information. And then when you start to see that government is now beholden to big tech in terms of, if they can do it to the president, then they can do it to anybody. Then you've got a situation where, well, who's really in charge? And that's why I think that the moral authority of Western governments is now coming into question, because at one time they could, come out and say, we condemn this coup, we condemn this voter fraud, but that's no longer the case. And again, its government doesn't have the control that it does over these companies. It's the companies having control over people that they don't like. And if they don't want to fund a particular political party, or if they disagree with a particular stance, whatever that stance is, then they're able to shut it down, as they did in Australia, as they did with President Trump. However, when you have situations where the government is in control, like that example I gave you of the Ugandan elections where they shut down Twitter, suddenly, big tech is like, oh, no fair, no fair, no fair. So again, I think that's where you see a situation that is spinning out of control and doesn't bode well for anyone involved.
I'm not 100% sure I'm upset. In fact, I think I might even be happy that Facebook has done this. I need some time to process it and think more about the consequences. But Damian, is this a great leveler of the playing field? Would this, if it had been done 2 years ago in America, maybe have undone or prevented some of the election rigging that the mainstream media did with their one-track narrative regarding the Trump-Biden political contest.
Maybe. The Australian media were particularly one track, and I think that's really just down to the fact that they don't have a lot of time to explain things, and so Orange Man Bad was a very simplistic way to put things in Australia, and they just perpetuated that. Australia being, it is quite a left-wing country in a lot of ways, or centre-left at least.
Yeah, sure.
Just with this situation with Facebook, I think, Matthew Wong had a good analogy today in an analysis he did, which I thought was quite clever. He basically said it's not a case of David and Goliath. So the Australian mainstream media is trying to pit itself as the little David against the big Goliath of American big tech, and they're playing that local versus foreign card, right? So there are certain narratives that companies will latch onto when they're trying to win an issue or they're in a crisis, and one of them is the local versus foreign, right? And another one is small guy versus big guy, or the David and Goliath narrative. And what Matthew was saying today was, you're looking at, they're trying to position it as Godzilla versus the little guy, right? Or the aliens versus the little guy, or the Predator versus the little guy. But actually what we're watching is an episode of Aliens versus Predator. And we're the little guys. And so we're seeing mainstream media in Australia, so the big media companies, Nine and Murdoch and all the rest of them, pitted against big tech internationally. So of course we're going to champion the Aussies in this one, and we're going to see them as being small as well versus the large global companies, and I think that's perfectly accurate and fine. But it's a little hard to kind of get a sense for who the good guys are in this narrative, because, the journalists themselves, I think that's the kind of the idea, and just to maybe to background people on what this is all really about, the Australian government is trying to introduce laws that will force Facebook and Twitter and Google, YouTube, who own YouTube, to pay Australian mainstream media outlets for their content. Okay, so they have to do a negotiation. So Google has sat down and made a deal with I can't remember which organization it is, or whether it's the collective of all the media outlets, but they're going to pay $30 million a year, I think, to the Australian mainstream media. Now, the idea is that that's going to fund the media to pay journalists to produce the content that's helping these guys make money. However, there's a flip side to all of this, right? Which is that, are the Australian mainstream media companies providing content for Facebook and YouTube and Google, or are Facebook, YouTube, and Google assisting the media companies by giving them audience, right? By channeling people and providing a platform that will direct traffic to their websites.
Yeah,
so it's a real tricky one from a liberal. I'm a classical liberal, so it's really interesting because it's kind of, I don't want government intervention, right? So I would just let the market do its thing. But I hear where the journalists are coming from, in that they want to be paid for their content, and so I get that argument from the mainstream media side.
Damian,
but also you've got this, the other side of the equation, which is big tech, who probably do need to be put in their place a little bit. But they've got a case saying, hey, it's not really fair because we set up this infrastructure and, you may benefit from it. Sorry, mate, what's that?
Can you hear Lyle okay?
Yeah.
No, I can't hear Lyle. Sorry, Lyle.
No, you're right. Look,
I can hear you now. Sorry, mate. Yeah.
Okay. No worries. Just fascinated in what you're saying, and I'm going to admit a little bit of ignorance here, but I think you're starting to help me understand. I've been trying to follow this issue and work out why it is that the mainstream media platforms are out of pocket as a result of Facebook and their news stories being shared. I would have thought that's a positive thing for them. and this is where I don't understand where the conflict is, because if I was a journalist at the Australian newspaper and I wrote a story and a gazillion people shared that on Facebook, that's a good thing. If I'm the owner of the Australian newspaper, Rupert Murdoch, that's great, because my audience is getting out there. Most people will click on it. It will say you need to take a subscription if you want to read this article or read more than 4 articles in the case of the 9 newspaper. So they would be getting more subscribers and therefore more revenue as a result of Facebook's activity. So
yeah, and that is Facebook and Google's point.
Argument.
Right? So the tech industry is saying, hang on a minute, exactly what you just said, Lyle. You get more money from us. We drive traffic to your websites, right? Because people click on them and they go to your website, then they're going to see the ads that your advertisers are buying, et cetera, et cetera. The media are saying, the mainstream media are saying, no, you're getting your advertisers because of our content. So because my news story from news.com appears on Facebook, your advertisers are getting eyeballs, but you're not paying my journalists. I'm paying the journalists as News Corporation, right? So you have to pay me to pay my journalists. But I'm a bit on your side, Lyle. I think it's kind of one of those things where you just let the market do its thing, because it's kind of balances out, I think. You know, they're sort of helping. It's symbiotic. They're helping each other. But unfortunately, the government doesn't see it that way. Josh Frydenberg's decided that he wants to back, I guess, to get, I don't know, from a political point of view, maybe you could tell us what the benefit is, but obviously gets him on side with journalists. Journalists are would be very, very happy about this. The journalists, not us, not the independent journalists, but the journalists who are working for mainstream media would be pretty happy about it.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add one comment to that, because when we talked about the idea of state-run media versus media-run state, this exact same thing happened in China, and I'm trying to think of when it was, but it was about 10 years ago. But it was the same situation where Xinhua and the state-run media were taking content from, I can't remember if it was Reuters or Bloomberg, let's just say Western media, and just kind of repurposing it. And there was a dispute over that. And again, it becomes a situation where do these Western media organizations want to remain in China, which is a state-run, which has state-run media, but now you've got a private company that's deciding on, like, that is a monopoly, that's using the exact same tactics that were criticized by media and the West, not like more than 5 or 10 years ago. So
hang on, so you're talking, sorry, Ray, I'm just confused there. You're talking about, you're saying Xinhua. Xinhua, by the way, just for the Australian audience, Xinhua is the
state-run media of China.
News agency. Yeah,
right. They were taking and repurposing content from Reuters, etc., and then not paying a licensing fee or whatever it was. Some sort of international dispute over it. But the point of this whole thing is, again, who's in charge, right? In China, it's state media is governed by the government. Whereas what we're talking about in at least the United States and in Western society, you have this big tech multimedia giant that's sort of dictating public policy. And, this business model where who gets what portion of what pie. I think that what you're seeing now is this fragmentation where rather than going to one, Damian and I used to run these crisis and media trainings where at the very beginning of this whole phenomenon, corporates would come up to us and say, someone just posted a negative comment, should we delete it? And we would kind of argue, like, let them have the conversation there, because at least you're able to kind of, in some ways, see what people are saying and monitoring it. If you go to a situation where one specific group goes off to one specific social media platform and another goes to another, you're just creating
echo chambers.
Echo chambers, but you're also creating more distrust in society, right? The more fragmentation of media that you have, the less that people are going to be looking for commonalities. They're going to be going, no, I'm going to go to my little group. I'm going to have a little comfort session here, but I don't want to hear anything from that group because they disagree with me. They talk mean to me. And so rather than communication being a platform and a vehicle for bringing people together, or social media being a platform for bringing people together, it's having the exact opposite effect. Somebody, I think, just commented, like, let us know when you're on, and they listed about 4 or 5, Parler, MeWe, whatever. Parler doesn't exist anymore. But this whole point of where are you going to go to have this conversation?
to answer that question, we need a lot more funding and donors to be able to post to 27 different social media channels for every single article, because the automation services just don't handle anything outside big tech, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Maybe LinkedIn and some very other peripheral ones where not many people are. But look, if it was easy and automatic, it certainly would be on all those channels. But when it takes 10 minutes just to share an article, and you've got 10 articles a day, I mean, it's so that it's ridiculous. And look, hey, just want to be where people are and get the news to them. Honestly, I'm sorry to interrupt your point there, Ray, but you brought up that comment, and it is good. I might just put it up on screen again, but the best news is, and the smart money is on. Sorry, I've lost the comment. Can't find it while I'm talking. The smart money on is get it in your email. Subscribe to the updates that you want to get, because every platform is temporary, whether it's 10 years away or 10 days away. You have to know that the Good Source and Epoch Times and OAN and American War Room, or War Room America,
War Room Pandemic,
the War Room thing. All of them are going to be taken down eventually. It's a matter of when, not if. So look, my plea is, please subscribe to the Good Source newsletters. Choose the authors that you want to hear from, and we'll make sure that it comes to you and nobody can tell you you can't see what we're saying. Ray, I'm sorry, you were on a momentum there. Please continue.
Well, what I'm saying is that these social media platforms, which were founded to kind of bring people together. I mean, if you think about how, 15 years ago, when people were like, are you on Facebook or on MySpace? And you had these two kind of platforms that were duking it out. And then suddenly Facebook took over because it was just easier to use. And then as soon as everybody migrated over there, MySpace, I don't know what even happened to it. It became like the beta format of like home video, right? It just disappears. And now beta? You're starting to see, beta is the small little tapes that you used to be able to rent. Yeah. Why? What's beta? What's VHS? So you've got this situation. No, but you've got a situation where it's like really easy to say, oh, well, we'll just create our own platform. But what are you going to do? Get your own servers, get your own. Parler tried to do that, and it didn't work. You've got all this other sort of. I didn't know that. You've got a bunch of other, but this is the thing. How well known is that, and who's even on it? It took, I think, a number of years for a lot of these platforms to build momentum, because first of all, people don't trust this anymore. Like, it's like, oh, well, let's go to MeWe. Oh, wait a second. MeWe has these privacy issues. Oh, let's go to this one. Oh, wait a second. They're owned by so-and-so. Oh, let's go. So
right.
There's two issues. One, the death of privacy. But the second issue that the second kind of idea that I want people to consider is the death of communication. Social media is supposed to bring people together, and it's actually a force for creating mistrust and division in society.
Yeah.
Because whoever happens to control the conch, or in this case, the moderator, whoever controls the flow, can decide, you're muted. Sorry. Like, I think, while I'm waiting, you put me into the holding room there, and I'm like, I could be screaming my head off and you wouldn't know it, right? Like, where's Ray? It's exactly that same situation. I'm just deep person. And back to the comment that I wanted to kind of wrap up with, you're starting to see the same situation that you saw in Eastern Europe with the fall of communism and the advent of like these communist states forming, where people would just be like depersoned. I mean, that film that I talked about, and I do encourage people to look at The Lives of Others. There's a scene in there with this artist who was somehow fallen in disfavor with the authorities, and he just can't get published. And then he ends up committing suicide. But he's just like, and they're trying to kind of say, well, we'll have a word with the authorities. But it's the same situation. The authorities control who gets to go on stage, who gets to produce a play, who gets to write. You've got the same situation now, but it's in private hands. And it's no better to be in private hands than it is in government hands. I think that there has to be a little bit more oversight in terms of not just like content moderation, but who is actually driving the debate, and what's the desired outcome of that debate, and it's still unclear.
I think this is why, Ray, there's been so much. It's been very hard for Gab and Parler, now that I think it's back, to really get momentum, because it is an echo chamber for conservative and right-wing views. And a lot of people don't really want to be just having that conversation amongst ourselves. I mean, we all agree with each other on a lot of things, so it's kind of, a bit boring. It's much more interesting to be in a broader format, and you want to influence people and you want to change their minds, right? So you want to kind of be where the action is, which is why Twitter has that advantage. But I think it's interesting the point you raised about, because for a classical liberal perspective on this would be, look, we don't want government anywhere near it. Let business work it out. But unfortunately, we live in a world where these corporations are so big and so powerful, because government hasn't really done its job, which is to try to prevent monopoly and centralization of power in the to compensate for the pitfalls of capitalism and the pitfalls of the free market, which are that eventually you wind up with monopolies. That's the one thing government should be trying to do, and keep the game fair and let smaller players in and stuff like that.
Right.
But that's the problem we've got now, because these big corporations it's just like another government. It's just an alternative government. And so I think we've got to get back to a point where, individual sovereignty, national sovereignty, and, we're really supporting small business over big business is what's important. And that's why I think this is an alien predator, to steal Matt's analogy again, the alien predator, or it's Goliath versus Goliath, not David versus Goliath in this case.
Yeah. Kel Bunyan has this comment: position vacant, truthful media. The ideal candidate would possess the following skills: be able to report on news without bias towards left or right. My opinion on that is there's no such thing. Everybody is human. Everybody has. It's like somebody saying religion should be kept out of politics. You mean my worldview should be kept out of politics, and your worldview is okay? And then that person says, oh, no, but I don't have a worldview. I'm an atheist, or I'm secular. Well, no, that is your worldview. There is no such thing as a culture vacuum. There is no such thing as a worldview vacuum. There is no such thing as a values, belief system, ideology, or political spectrum vacuum. You are somewhere on a political spectrum of views: authority versus liberty, left versus right, morality versus libertine. There is no such thing as somebody who is not biased. No, I think the key is to be honest about your biases, declare your prejudices, declare your affiliations. That's why on the Good Source, beneath every article, beneath every post, we have the author's bio. So you can weigh what they're saying, because there's no such thing as pure objectivity. We see these ABC journalists pretending to be objective, like Michael Rowland, getting his knickers in a knot and all offended when somebody says you're a lefty, and his Twitter trail is the proof of the pudding a mile deep.
Yeah, I don't want to be too, promoting my own show, but in the other side, Australia, which you can see on the Good Source platform, promote it. Dave, we raised this issue about how the media is starting to lose its credibility with the Ali Langdon thing, with Craig Kelly, and then you had Michael Rowlands with Greg Hunt, and then there was the American one where the lawyer for Trump criticised the CBSN anchor for a biased question. We're starting to see spokespeople fighting back. So, my point has always been, there is no such thing as no bias. You're absolutely right. And I think you've got to declare as best you can what your bias is. And so we say on the other side of Australia, we're classical liberal centre right. And that's the lens through which we're presenting stuff. We will try within that to be fair to everybody and try to be balanced. But I'm trying to balance out the overall bias. The show's called The Other Side, meaning the other side to the left-wing ABC. And I thought that was just beautiful with Greg Hunt, what he did to Michael Rowlands this week, just to say, Ray, this is a breakfast show host in Australia on the ABC, a guy called Michael Rowlands. And in the middle of an interview, one of our conservative government politicians just said, everyone knows you're left-leaning, Michael, that you lean on the left side. And he took a very, very great offence to that. But as Dave just said, you have a look at his Twitter feed, and it's very clear what side of politics he's on. as is. I mean, there was wasn't there an Australian? No, sorry, there was a research study done by somebody. I think it was published in the Australian last year or the year before that showed that they actually did a sample of who votes what at the ABC, and it was 41% of ABC employees vote Green, and 30-something vote Labor, and 14% vote for the Liberal National Party on the Conservative side. So it's pretty extraordinary that that the ABC isn't required to sort of state its position on certain things. But I mean, you've only got to watch it for 10 minutes to know what its politics is.
Absolutely. Look, this is a really important discussion. There is bias. As Ray said, we're not talking to each other. We have retreated into our tribes, and we're all as guilty of that as anyone else. I haven't listened. I used to listen to the ABC every day. I now listen to the podcasts that I want to hear. I'm sick and tired of being talked down to by left-wing journalists. And yes, they do have their bias, but we have to, as much as that's comforting, and I do that because I want to get the truth, what I believe to be the truth. And, but we've got to find a way to bring the discourse back together, because we can't have a civil society, we can't have a functioning democracy unless we're able to talk these things through. And yes, labels like left, right, conservative, liberal, lefty, whatever, they serve a purpose. But I think we've got to start to be careful about the use of those labels and find a way to actually say, well, look, I'm not wedded to my particular political identity. I'm wedded to finding the truth. And I fear that our democracy can't function in tribes. It wasn't designed for that. The reason why the democracies, which the Americans really brought into the modern era and Australia copied and most of the world aspires to, is based on the idea of a participatory democracy where there is a clash of ideas, where together we duke it out metaphorically in a chamber or in the public discourse, and then we settle on the truth. But at the moment, we're not hearing each other, and so we're cancelling each other, and that's extremely dangerous. And unless we can find a resolution to this, we're going to continue to atomize, and I think it could become quite a serious issue for our polity.
Well, Lyle, I'm just going to make this point where you talk about the idea of liberal democracy. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to raise this point for discussion. I think the idea of redefining what is an authoritarian state is now a relevant question. It used to be anything that was communist in the Cold War was evil. I mean, I was growing up in that time period, and like Poland always looked at this idea that one day we will be free, and we knew who the enemy was. The enemy was the communists, and they were like, and now it's like, living in Hong Kong, I was just having this conversation with Damian off air, where the government has just opened up a lot more of the venues today on February 18th, and you have a situation where they have this tracking app, right, where you go into a restaurant and you track it. There was a story where some guy just went off his head because he was at a McDonald's and the staff member was spending too much time with the customer in front of him, getting him to understand how this tracking app worked. And so he assaulted the poor McDonald's staffer with his cell phone. So that's what you've got here. But then on top of that, the government's made allowances for that level of, going crazy. And they said, all right, you can have the tracking app or you can sign in. If you want to protect your privacy, just make sure that wherever you're going keeps track of the fact that you were there. This is a police state where you have an option. Meanwhile, in Australia, it seems like you're being locked up. You can't have freedom of movement. Here, where we're condemned as being a police state, and it's like you're losing your liberties. The government's actually made allowances. Like, we understand that some people may not want to download that app. You might have an older phone, or you don't want to be part of a tracking app. So as long as you sign in, that's okay. We will respect your privacy.
Yeah, but that's the Hong Kong government, Ray. That's the Hong Kong government. They've still got
Hong Kong.
That's not China. If it was
no. Yeah, well, but
in Australia we do have the option to just write our names down as well. I think in some places. But
you did.
Yeah, I mean, look, you don't have to tell me. I lived in Asia for 20 years, and I thought, boy, if I ever get stuck on a border issue where I'm not allowed to go back and see my family, I'm going straight home to Australia. Well, here I am now living back in Australia.
You can't move.
First time in my life, I can't cross a border to see my family. So
exactly.
What has my home country become? Right? What are we now? We have to really have a good, hard think about this after the COVID thing passes, or maybe right away. We have to start thinking about what are we as a nation? What does it mean to be safe?
What is an authoritarian state? Like, how much of this creeping authoritarianism can people actually tolerate before they actually say enough is enough? And that, I think, is where you've got a situation that big tech plays a huge role. You see now in this coup that took place in Burma, where the government cut. There is a sort of formula that takes place in these revolutions. When a coup takes place, government comes in, they cut off social media, take over the media, the regular media. They try to control the information. They put people out in the streets to kind of police everybody. But you've got the situation where governments, I think, cut off a lot of social media. And you've got this situation where the United States is saying, oh, no, you've got to open it up. We need to have free discussion. Meanwhile, Russia's condemning the United States for persecuting
what you've described there, Ray, what you've just described Burma is exactly what's happened in the United States with their election. You've had big tech, and this is all laid bare in that Time magazine article. You had Facebook pouring money into battleground states to try and get out the vote, then suppressing the news, deplatforming the president. I mean, how is the coup in Burma any different to what appears to be a coup in the United States? Now, I want to qualify that language. I think I don't want to say the election has been stolen or anything like that. But what I do want to say is there's enough evidence to suggest that there needs to be a thorough investigation, and yet all this is being suppressed in a Burma-like way.
Well, and from a media perspective, it's really hard to understand what exactly is happening in Burma. I don't understand these allegations from the junta that there was election fraud. I don't get it, because there isn't enough information. Like, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, maybe this is all made up. But I can't understand it because I can't get access to kind of information that would help me to make that decision and comment properly.
To what's happened in the US? What you have just said there about I can't get information about what's happened in Burma, how different is that to the situation where you've got citizens in Arizona trying to get subpoenas out for the election officials in Maricopa County, in Georgia? Information wasn't forthcoming. The courts wouldn't hear the evidence. The Supreme Court wouldn't.
Well, the Supreme Court, it's going to be very interesting, because tomorrow the Supreme Court in the United States is going to determine which cases it hears. And among the cases on being put forward to the Supreme Court are a number of, election fraud cases that it will be very interesting to see whether or not they decide to take any of those cases up. But again, you've got a situation in the United States where I just saw a column on this and I thought it was fascinating. Be careful what you wish for. So you've got this situation where now you've got Joe Biden in the White House, but it's all starting to unravel for the Democrats. In California, you've got a recall situation with somebody who was a very popular governor, poised to possibly be the president, is now being recalled. Andrew Cuomo of New York is facing greater scrutiny. Meanwhile, in Florida, you've got this governor who's a Republican who's brought down the numbers of COVID cases, and he's coming under attack from the federal government and the Biden administration. The media, meantime, are asking Biden questions like, what kind of donuts can we have next time we meet with you? And, what's your dog doing? Sure, you can have those kind of warm, fuzzy questions. But when it's every single day and nothing's really being scrutinized, the media, that I think you were talking about, what was it like being a reporter like 10, 15 years ago, 25 years ago? There were fewer media and there was a lot more competition to be a journalist. So everybody, I think, paid a lot more attention to journalistic ethics. And there was a time I remember in the city that I was working in where I really pushed the limit with a police story. And I got, talked to like, don't do this because I think you're making, you're creating this division in society against police, and you don't have any evidence about it. So I was like, well, okay, okay. Fine, I get that. But
that's interesting. We had a situation today or yesterday, I think, with one of our citizen journalists, a guy called Avi Yemeni, who has a network called, or works for a Canadian network called Rebel News. So they're quite controversial. And Avi's a bit of a he's got some controversy. I don't want to, criticize the guy too much. I think what he does is his actual content's terrific, but there have been hit jobs done on him and articles written about him to say these are all the horrible things about him. But he's not, nothing that should cast aspersions on his approach, I think. But he showed up to the Victorian State Parliament yesterday with his press pass and was denied access to Dan Andrews' press conference simply because they didn't want him there. They didn't want anyone asking challenging and disruptive questions. Now, the police that surrounded him, it was like, 8 or 9 police officers. Avi's put the video up. Just incredible to me that, and I think it's time that, we sort of said, look, I don't care whether you're, conservative or you're here or you're that or you're whatever. As Lyle said, it doesn't matter. The point is the principle of free speech, the principle of journalism, the principle of being able to challenge power and ask questions and bring truth to power. What amazed me most about that, and I've covered state parliament in Victoria. There was a pack of journalists around waiting for Dan Andrews. This is all going on in the background. It's like you guys are standing 20 meters away from a news story. It's unfolding in front of you. The police are approaching a journalist.
And no one cares.
Around and do your job. But nobody did. We would have in the olden days, Ray, I think.
Well, I think that there would have been that, but I think that individual would have been an outlier. Here, I think there's this idea of there's us as the trusted media pack, and then there's like this group that is like the kook.
That's the issue.
Journalist. And it's we decide who's the kook in the fringe because we're the media.
That's right. It's a boys' club. Like well, it's a cliche. I don't know that I could say Avi got the rough end of the pineapple. I sympathise with him because I like him and I agree with, I've got no problems with Rebel News or Avi. He's happy to say publicly he's a close friend. We chat for long times on the phone every now and then. However, I guess I want to do the test. What if the shoe was on the other foot? There's a clown who has all the attributes except for the makeup, and he's one of the biggest names, Jim Acosta. That clown. And he's one of the boys' club in CNN. And I would have had absolutely no problems at all if his White House press pass was revoked. He was incredibly badly behaved, and he didn't deserve the privilege of a press pass.
Well, one of those guys, but I think it was either him or somebody else from that pack that was banned by the Trump administration, and it became a huge story for about 2 or 3 days
because he was part of the boys' club
with a small circle, right? So they're all pounding on him, saying, "Oh, come on!"
If he was from Rebel News,
Trump is. But meanwhile, Biden won't answer any questions of any substance, and you've got this situation, this trickle, like back to the idea of redefining what is the authoritarian state. So Orange Man bad, and like he's like this kind of crazy Hitler, Nazi, fascist.
Yep.
Meanwhile, you've had 45 plus executive orders signed by Biden within, I think, the first month. Has it been almost a month since he took office? I mean, this is governing by decree, right? This is what authoritarian states do. There's no discussion of a lot of these things. It's like, okay, we're going to sign it. And in some of these situations, you saw this town hall that Biden did yesterday that was really quite shocking, where he's talking and he says, when we took office, there was no vaccine. Well, there was. So either he's lying or he forgot And this, I think, is, and the media doesn't correct them. Like, the host doesn't go, wait a second, that's not true. There were 2 vaccines produced. In fact, there was enough controversy suggesting that they were produced and announced immediately after the election, which in some conservative circles suggested that that helped you by not having a vaccine. But no one put that, like, that's how I would answer the question.
Well, Dave, just to your point on Harvey and also Jim Acosta, I mean, the difference is that Jim Acosta is in there. And I think you can draw a parallel with the Craig Kelly interview on the Today Show with Ali Langdon and the way that she was extremely rude to Craig Kelly. That certainly is not acceptable. There is a way. Journalists' job is to bring truth to power, right? We're supposed to challenge. We're supposed to challenge on the merits of the argument, though. We're not supposed to be rude and obnoxious. You can put a little theatre and drama into your performance if you're a broadcast journalist, sure. But you shouldn't, be just doing a Jim Acosta or doing an Ali Langdon, right? Yeah. Now, the issue for Avi, and I don't know Avi at all, I've never spoken to him, but my understanding is he couldn't even get in there. I mean, he wasn't, I watched the tape. Yeah. He couldn't go into the press conference. So, and I've seen Avi in press conferences acting quite normally and asking good questions. He's a good young reporter.
Let me ask you,
because he does agitate for. I mean, he probably would have loved it if the police had decked him.
But let me ask you a question, and I think this is a really good.
It does provoke the police.
Let me ask you guys. Let me take it one step further and ask all of you to comment on the next point that I wanted to make, which is
we'll have to have a break before we move to the next topic. So Ray, just
throw it out there. All right,
the last one.
So we have this situation. You bring up the fact that there was no, outrage or public outrage or media outrage. Would this have happened a year ago if this COVID lockdown hadn't happened? I think that there's this complacency now where, the media is sort of echoing society in terms of, well, I guess it's like, he kind of was being obnoxious and we're not really and they're just sort of going along with this whole thing. Whereas maybe a year ago, this would have been seen as a huge affront to free speech and that the media was being threatened. It's not even a story anymore because we're allowing this to happen, this creeping authoritarianism within Australian society has just been allowed to flourish because, okay, we'll stay inside. Okay, we won't go out. Oh, I guess we can't travel between the cities and states anymore. Like that creeping authoritarianism has been internalized and accepted.
Well, I think the reason for that, Ray, is because we've forgotten what it is to be citizens of a democracy. And this is going back to first principles. A democracy is meant to be participatory. It's meant to be government of the people, by the people. We've allowed it to be government by authoritarians like Dan Andrew and tech oligarchs like Mark Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey. And we've been like sheep. And I think we've been seduced by materialism. Life has been comfortable. We haven't had civics education for a generation. People don't understand why it's important, and they don't understand that a democracy only works if people are engaged, if they're informed. And I think we're victims of the atrophy of our own civilization. And unless that changes, we will drift towards more authoritarianism because people don't know how to live in a free society anymore because they need authoritarians like Dan Andrews to tell them what to do, how to think, where to go, whether they can go outside, whether they can exercise, whether they can go interstate or whatever. The fact that so many people are comfortable with that is truly shocking and are not rebelling. And I think that's because of the atrophy that's occurred over the last 20 or 30 years as we've forgotten what it is to be free people.
Well, we're going to take a short break right now. And when we come back, we are going to have a look at the American politics landscape. But first of all, a word from our sponsor, the Australian Church and State Summit 2021. Let me see if I can get this playing at the same time as I'm talking.
Hi, I'm Dan Patterson from Questioning Christianity, a ministry that exists to help connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. And I want to invite you along to the Church and State Summit that's going to be held very soon. Why? Well, because I am passionate about taking people's questions seriously. Our culture is full of them. And many people are Christianity is simply not true, that faith is lazy, anti-intellectual thinking, that Christianity is a delusion. And I want to tackle that head on. And many other people think that far from just being an irrelevant delusion, that in fact religion and Christianity in particular is harmful to society, that its ideas are repressive, outdated, and damaging to people's lives. And I want to speak to that question. Many Christians feel voiceless at the moment, unaware of how to respond to these challenges and have meaningful God conversations, feeling pushed out of the public square. And so if you feel voiceless, if you want to have better God conversations, if you want to know the reason why we believe that Christianity is true and good, then these are the kind of questions we're going to be tackling at the Church and State Summit in the Friday afternoon session. I'm going to be picking up on whether or not the scriptures give us a good window into reality, whether we can believe that they are trustworthy and true, as well as how we as human beings point towards the truth of the Christian story. I can't wait to get into these questions and hope to see you there at the summit.
Well, we are back. I don't know if you were hearing really weird kind of delays on that video, but apologies if you got bad audio quality. It's really good on YouTube and Facebook. So yeah, please check out the Church and State website, churchandstate.com.au, and there's lots of good promos from our speakers there. We'll watch another short one from Matt Canavan a little bit later, I think, and we'll watch the 4-minute trailer at the end of the show. No, we won't do that. You can watch it. It's a little bit long. Ray, I want to turn the conversation to America, and I think I want to actually start with you. This is right in your wheelhouse. The media standards when it comes to covering the Biden presidency. It's not far off what we were talking about, but following on from this, I want to talk about Trump having a go at Mitch McConnell and, of course, losing a legend of conservative broadcasting today. But, Ray, first of all, the media's performance covering the Biden administration.
Yeah, it's been shocking in terms of how cringeworthy it is. The White House press briefings just seem to be kind of going in this whole sort of circle back, where they don't really talk about anything substantial. And now you're starting to see reporters asking tougher questions, which she can't answer. She can't even circle back on because I don't think they have a real position. The last one that I saw was a question around okay, so if we're headed towards a continued lockdown, why is the Biden administration committed to freeing people who cross the border illegally? And there's no answer for that. It's like, well, wait a second. You're putting people, ordering them to stay in their homes, wear masks, and yet you're letting in all these undocumented migrants and then allowing them to, basically go back into the country. Isn't that contradictory? No answer. You've got a situation, the latest one that's being played over and over and over again is this question about what type of log Joe Biden uses in the White House fireplace. And, isn't this romance between him and his wife so wonderful? And it goes on and on and on. And I think it's just starting to get to a situation where in some of these forums, you're not seeing a situation where people are going to go, no, I'm going to vote for Republican or I'm going to vote for Trump. They're saying things like, I'm never going to vote again. Let's boycott the system. Let's not participate because that's the only way to send a message to Washington in the wake of this. And that impeachment trial, I think you're talking about, how the Australian situation with the journalist and that politician. You had a situation involving Trump's lawyer who was interviewed by a journalist following the acquittal on the impeachment charge. And the journalist pushes the lawyer for Trump. And he says, this was shambolic. And, we had, 3 cases of evidence tampering, and he points them out. And she says, yeah, but it's only 3. And he says, wait a second, do you understand the justice system? Evidence tampering is completely illegal. And even one case is too many. And then he just goes off on this tangent and just browbeats her. And she's like stunned because, again, this whole idea of, near enough is good enough. And I think we've lost sight of the fact that in this whole 4 years of dehumanizing Trump and all his supporters, people's perspective of what is the foundation of a democracy is lost. No, you can't have some evidence tampering. That's okay. Yeah. Evidence tampering, perjury, I mean, certain crimes like that in no due process.
Absolutely shocking, Ray. I watched that CBNBC, or I'm pronouncing it wrong.
I think it's CBS was the, it wasn't
CBS,
CNBC, it was CBS.
Yeah.
And he throws the microphone down and he walks away.
Well, I think he was justified in doing that. I thought that was one of the most powerful pushbacks of the mainstream media I've ever seen. Trump's lawyer, Michael Van der Veen, as you said, he pointed out that there had been evidence tampered with. She was sort of trying to run obstruction to that. But what really shocked me...
She was downplaying evidence tampering.
Absolutely, which shows there's no moral compass. But even worse than that, in news.com.au here in Australia, a story was put up lampooning Michael Van der Veen as mansplaining in terms of his pushback on this journalist downplaying the seriousness of evidence tampering. Now we've completely lost our moral compass when the media won't even engage with a serious allegation. You imagine if the Trump legal team had doctored any evidence in that Senate trial, there would be hell to pay. Yet there's this huge leave pass that's now given, again, because you're on the right ideological team. It's very, very worrying, Ray, and I think you're right to point that out. And I fear for our society because we don't even know the difference between black and white anymore.
Well, and that impeachment trial was something out of the 1930s Soviet Union. I mean, no evidence, no witnesses. They've got this thing where they're threatening the livelihood and the future. I saw a very good interview when we were doing the podcast together with Damian, where the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, said that the most frightening thing emerging from all of this was the criminalization of the office of president. Yeah. I mean, who's next? Like, are they going to suddenly decide, let's go after Joe Biden because, he's not all there. And then suddenly, they start to kind of attack him. He's in less of a position to defend himself than Trump ever was.
Well, I think he'll be defended by the left establishment. But
will he? Because you've got so many different factions now working against each other in terms of just the intrigue behind the scenes. You've got Jill Biden, who's kind of the enabler. She's not going to let anything happen. You've got Kamala Harris, who's waiting in the wings, but doesn't have any sort of constituency beyond California and big tech. You've got all these different players that were pushed out of the election. You've got these young progressives or radicals that are itching to get their hands on the levers of power. It's not that clear cut like, oh, we won, guess what? It's this fractionalized party, and you're already starting to see it come apart at the seams. The situation in New York with Governor Cuomo facing serious allegations about his mishandling of the COVID situation there. In California, it looks like there's going to be a recall of Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom, who at one time was touted as being the next, being groomed as a potential presidential candidate. That's gone. That's over, regardless of the outcome there.
Good point you raised, Ray, because the Democratic Party, as you're saying, is very fragmented. You've got all these different power dynamics going on. You've got, as you say, Cuomo in trouble and the governor in California, Newsom, being recalled. You've got a very weak man in the White House in Joe Biden, Kamala Harris waiting in the wings.
It's an episode of House of Cards. It really is.
Well, it is. And you just wonder whether some of the things we saw in House of Cards are closer to reality. Just going back to the show trial that you mentioned, the other thing that Stalin would have been proud of in that was the struggle session. You had Ted Lieu, the impeachment manager for the Democrats, saying, if only Trump would just say the election.
Just say you did it. Just say.
That's right. Kiss the ring and everything will be fine. But this is you mentioned the criminalizing of the office of president, but even beyond that, this is about demeaning and demonizing the 75 million people who voted for Trump and having them labeled as domestic terrorists, that they are tarred with what happened at the White House because of their at the Capitol building, because of their political views. They, with Trump, are guilty by association of inciting an insurrection.
And then you see this rift growing within the Republican Party, where those 7 senators who voted for impeachment are now facing the wrath of their colleagues, because it's like you sided with the Democrats. But I think what you're seeing increasingly, and this is being talked about on various boards, is this this growing either evidence of, or the sort of curtain has been torn away, and we now see that there's like the uniparty. It's this, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, there's this one group that all kind of like, they all sort of believe the same thing, whether they're, and then on the outside of it, you've got this kind of these sort of more like radical elements of both the Democrats and the Republicans. And so that factionalized aspect of American politics, I think, is a new phenomenon that has become something that is growing in part of the day-to-day political life.
Ray, can I just say one thing that really disturbed me, and look, I think the battle lines are becoming clear. Trump had a big crack at Mitch McConnell this week. Now, I think the crack was justified. What I don't like is Trump's ridiculing of him and the playing the personality, calling him some dour old fellow and ridiculing him. I think attack the ideas, not the man. But what I think is becoming clear out of this discussion is, you've articulated very clearly the division on the Democratic side, but the divisions on the Republican side are also there for everyone to see. And I think we've got a lack of clear leadership on both the left and the right in America. Who's going to lead the Trump movement into the future? Is it going to be Trump? Will someone else rise up? Who is really leading the Democratic government in the White House? I think this is a recipe for a lot of uncertainty, and it's going to take a while for the leadership, I think, to distill on both the left and the right in the United States.
You have this situation in American politics where there's almost this sort of general acceptance that the Biden administration is a placeholder administration. It is the Obama restoration. They've got all these holdovers from that administration coming in and kind of taking on these key positions. But the focus is now on 2024. Like, who's going to be the person? Is it going to be this person? Is it going to be this person? That's the person. And anytime a Republican makes a speech or appears on television, there's all this sort of speculation. Is that the person? Is it going to be DeSantis? Is it going to be Matt Gaetz? Is it going to be so-and-so? Is it going to be Nikki Haley? And it's way too soon to even kind of speculate. Is it going to be Trump? It's just like you're talking about. Would you have known 4 years ago that we would be in this situation with, COVID and a divided country and a world shut down and the definition of authoritarianism, completely up in the air with regards to what it really means anymore? No, I wouldn't. I don't think I would have kind of, like, if you asked me 4 years ago, oh, what's going to happen in 4 years? I was still betting steak dinners that Trump was going to win, because I believed that the system wasn't as rotten as it turned out or appears to be.
Yeah. Well, we did election coverage here, and we were absolutely certain Trump was going to win. And it became clear, I think, within a day or two that it wasn't going to be so easy. And still, this disbelief had to be sustained over the ensuing weeks. And I think right up until the inauguration, I held out hope that SCOTUS or somebody else, and they just wouldn't even hear the case. No,
it wouldn't. And I think this is something that has got to be resolved. I read Paul Kelly's article, this great Australian commentator in the Australian newspaper, editor at large, saying that, look, Trumpism's over, conservatives need to disavow themselves of him. But underpinning his assumption is that the election was legitimately won by Biden. I just can't get away from the evidence that I've seen that it wasn't. You've got all the issues of the mail-in ballots and the setting aside of state legislation. Then you've got and Ray, I'd be interested in your thoughts on I don't know if you've had a chance to watch Mike Lindell's so-called Absolute Proof documentary. I spent 2 hours watching it last week. Now, I don't think he provides absolute proof, but he provides a lot of disturbing evidence, which I think must be investigated and just can't be dismissed as baseless conspiracy theories.
Here's the crunch, is that even if you don't consider it absolute proof, for the courts and for especially people who claim to be objective journalists to dismiss everything out of hand and say there's not even the whiff of wrongdoing, nothing needs investigation.
Nothing to see here, folks. I mean, whenever
that is complete. That is complete corruption.
This is the totalitarian state that Ray is talking about. But I think we are in a state of flux here. Obviously, we're talking about the problems on the left. The problems on the right, you've got this McConnell, Trump, establishment, MAGA movement rift. And I think we've got to see good leadership emerge. That is tied up intrinsically with resolving the electoral issues and the big question mark that lies over that. And what we're seeing is an attempt by the left of politics to suppress that, to say, don't raise that, don't say it, say the magic words, it was stolen. I think, no, we've got to resist that. We've got to demand that there be truth in all this, that there's proper investigation, because I think that changes everything. That would then embolden a new movement. But who leads that? Is it Trump? Is it someone else? I think we're in a lot of uncharted waters at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, I think that that a lot of that is just kabuki. Like, it's all kind of theater. The fact of the he said, she said arguments. I think that what's really at stake is changing power structure. And when you have a group of, when you have power concentrated in such a small group or an industry group, then I think you've got a situation where it won't change. Trump was the outsider, regardless of how anyone may feel about him. He was regarded at the very beginning as this sort of joke. Yeah. And, he's just like, and as soon as it suddenly became clear that he was going to win, there was this whole rush to kind of, again, allegations that the Obama administration was spying on him, all sorts of things that still haven't fully been explored as well. And I think that demonstrates that he was fighting against a system that doesn't allow outsiders to take part in.
And that's the
in political life. So the whole thing with Mitch McConnell and him kind of, barking at each other. I mean, that to me, I think that's just interesting, but it's a one-day story. The bigger story is does the system now allow for outsiders to take part in political discourse? And so far, what we're seeing is the answer is no, because big tech controls the levers of power when it comes to who gets to have a microphone and share information.
And if that's the case, Ray, that's extremely disturbing, because it means there's no place for us outsiders. It means that our democracy is corrupted. And this is a huge wake-up. I mean, I still, this is why I can't let go of this issue of the integrity around the US election. As much as the mainstream media here in Australia, as much as Paul Kelly, who I revere, says move on, Australian conservatives who, thought there was something in Trump. And, I hasten to say I wasn't attracted to Trump, the man. I'm attracted to Trump, the policies. The aspect of Trump, the man, that I am attracted to is his conviction. I don't like the way he ridicules and demeans people. But if someone like Trump, who's an outsider who disrupted the swamp, is then forced out through nefarious means, as it would seem, through what would seem to be the rigging of an election and everything from the Dominion voting machines through to what the state electoral authorities did. And yet we are all being told to move on. This is a very, very serious thing. We can't just allow a US election to be treated like some sort of Zimbabwean plebiscite and told we can't even ask questions about it because, well, that means you're like a domestic terrorist inciting insurrection. And this is where it's insidious. And you're right. It's the abuse of power. And we should all be chilled to the bone that this could even be entertained.
Well, and I think that you get a situation where America's, enemies or rivals or countries that, it is constantly trying to, sway politically, China, Russia, and others, are leveraging this. And as I said in the previous segment, when you read the Russian foreign ministry and they're like coming out and saying, we condemn the Biden administration for its persecution of Trump supporters. I mean, what they're basically doing is just uber trolling the United States in terms of you come to us and say that this Putin guy is a dictator, but look what's going on in your own country. And that I think is more dangerous than anything else. So you've got that. You've got this these 45 plus executive orders. So you've got ruling by decree. You've got a situation where everything is just so politicized in the United States right now when it comes to decision making that nothing gets done. And then there is no scrutiny or oversight because the traditional alphabet media and is basically aligned with the political interests of the ruling party or ruling parties. And I think that situation sets itself up for a very unstable future when it comes to decision making, whether it's in terms of deciding how to reopen the economy, whether it's to on how to deal with some of these issues that are plaguing the United States, like immigration, energy, climate change, Russia, China, and some of the other destabilization that's going on in other countries. Or does the United States even want to be involved in some of the things? I think ideologically, you're seeing around the world and even within the United States, there isn't this conservative left or right and left. I think it's now kind of moving beyond that into things that are more kind of inward, like let's fix America versus globalism versus nationalism. And that I think is something that you're seeing in around the world. Certainly in China, you've seen that where, a number of years ago when Xi Jinping first took power, his whole thrust was to move China from being an export-driven economy to a domestic demand-driven economy so that they didn't have to rely on the West for buying things, and selling things, that they could actually rely on their own internal economy and then create these little spheres of influence in emerging markets, which is what they're doing. Why isn't the United States doing that? Why isn't the United States doing that? They're not.
Absolutely, and that's that's exactly. I mean, China's push has been to consolidate itself and its economic sovereignty, so that it can run its economy just on domestic demand. It doesn't have to rely on the export industry. So something I think Australians really need to understand. So they want to have that internal strength, so they can go it alone, while simultaneously through the Belt and Road Initiative, letting their tentacles go out throughout the world to create that economic influence. Whether they're interested in a hot war in a nuclear age, I'm not so sure. I don't know if I buy into the idea that they're going to launch an attack on Taiwan anytime soon. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ray, but I think Taiwan still has nuclear warheads pointed at China.
Well, I'll say this. Honestly, I don't think that the Chinese military is set up for that sort of conflict. However, having said that, in 1996, this was still a time where during those presidential elections, and I remember it very well, China was lobbing missiles off the coast of Taiwan trying to influence the vote, and it didn't work. And then in 2000, you had Chinese Premier Zhu Rongji saying, basically, doing this really Mussolini-style kind of rant, saying they better vote the wrong way. They better vote the right way. And they ended up electing a kind of a sort of separatist government, or what do they call it?
Yeah, they're not terribly smart when it comes to propaganda.
A pro-independence party in Taiwan. So I think they've gone in a different direction now. And what they're looking at is trying to create these economic spheres of influence. And that is where you see Chinese foreign policy being very successful. They're going out and they're trying to set up markets in some of these emerging markets. They're taking over in Africa and in the whole belt,
Pacific Islands.
You're right. The Belt and Road Initiative. These are
Victoria.
all things. Right, exactly. And you see, but this is a country that is very much looking out for its own interests first. And I think that ideology of the nationalist ideology, you're seeing taking shape in some countries around the world. And then this other sort of globalization initiative taking part. And those are the two spheres. It's not so much conservative versus left or right versus left. I think that is kind of not the way in which the world is being polarized. I think it's more along these other lines, and the United States is now in conflict over that because you saw a president in Trump who was very much an America first, or had a more nationalist agenda, an economic nationalist agenda, and then you've got a new administration that I think has a different worldview. And those two views are in conflict, especially when you have a result that's so close and so many questions like ones that you've raised about the legitimacy. The legitimacy of the election is a very important question that still hasn't quite been resolved. And I
think the people in Beijing, the Chinese Communist Party, they'd be very happy about the result of the election, and whether it's legitimate or not doesn't worry them. And I think they would have taken a lot of comfort from Joe Biden at that CNN town hall that you mentioned the other night, where he essentially seemed to be talking from the talking points of the CCP. This is Biden on China saying, well, Xi Jinping, cut him a little slack. He's expected to unify his country, and whenever China isn't unified, there's trouble. And there's this issue with the PLA gang raping Uyghur women in the Western provinces, but hey, cultural norms. This is just outrageous, and yet Biden, here he is appeasing. And you talk about Taiwan. I don't think they're going to need a hot war to take Taiwan. I think a weak President Biden, who speaks from the CCP talking points a day or two after his 2-hour conversation on the telephone with Xi Jinping, he gets his marching orders from Beijing, and he delivers on CNN, and even to the point of glossing over the genocide of Muslim Uyghurs. It's a disgrace. And again, to your point on the media don't pick this up. He's given a leave pass. They should be. This is an outrage.
But this is the problem.
Sorry, Ray, can I just ask Lyle a question? I've been waiting for a while. I want to ask him something. Lyle, you're a politician, or you've been a politician in this country.
I want to be a politician. I'm a failed candidate on multiple levels.
All right. Well, you understand the game, I guess, and also this question also to David. I see a parallel here between the Australian political environment and what we're seeing going on globally, and maybe it's just life and it's just something that's always been the case, but how do you win power and hold on to power? And I think this is where we're seeing this new, ScoMo's not exactly firing up on leadership. He's being a manager, not a leader, and he's running the government based on market research. I think, being a market guy, he's getting the research telling him this is what the majority think, this is what the middle think, go with these lines. And so we're not seeing any leadership. We're not seeing him saying, hey, I've got a national cabinet here because we've got to unify the country. We've got to get the states united. We need to be on the same page with our policies. He's not standing up to Labor premiers. He's embracing Labor premiers. And yet somebody like Tony Abbott, Abbott had his issues, I guess, but Dutton, or any other conservative, strong conservative like yourself, Lyle, who tried to go forward into the political arena and drive a more conservative position, just wouldn't get elected. So is it better that we compromise and have some power than we put up a right-wing candidate and lose completely? This is something that I wrestle with. And I know, David, you've got strong views on this, and I find it really fascinating. I like your position or idea that this coming to the center may not be what we should be doing, that we have to have We have to have some core values that we stand on as a nation that are consistent. If they don't, we don't have a nation. A nation is what's in your head, right? It's what you believe your country to be. And if we continually compromise and erode our national, I'm not wedded to the 26th of January as Australia Day, for example, right? I'd be quite happy with it being the 1st of January, provided we have an Australia Day. But I have issue with the fact that
which is the issue.
Neo-Marxist operate,
issue.
And once they get Australia Day, they're going to go after Anzac Day.
Well,
so
forget
I'll fight it on that basis.
It's not the date; it's the purpose, which
that's
they
right. And it's what can happen next, right? It's what they might do with Anzac Day.
I'll let you go first, Lyle, and then I'll follow up my thoughts on that after you. But then we will segue to another couple of topics for the final half hour, including after another short ad break, your thoughts on Rush Limbaugh, and we'll also talk about nuclear energy, just to bring it home in another small, completely change of topic. But
well, Damian, I wrestle with these issues like you do, and what you've said goes to the heart of why people like me have found it so difficult to make it in the mainstream political arena. I mean, I suppose as a purist, I hitched my wagon to Cory Bernardi's Australian Conservatives 3 years ago, and we gave that a red hot go. I ran as the Senate candidate here in Queensland. I really felt that movement embodied what the nation needed, and I still cast my mind back to the events we held in the lead up to the 2019 election. What Cory was saying, what our movement was saying, were the things we were talking about here tonight. And yet we couldn't hardly move the needle in terms of getting votes. And so, I look at Scott Morrison. I've had the privilege of meeting him over the years many, many times. I think his instincts are conservative, but there's a pragmatism. And, Jared Henderson wrote a piece in the Weekend Australian, defending his pragmatism, saying he was in the genre of Joseph Lyons, John Howard, to a certain extent, and we all lionize Howard. He certainly was pragmatic and did what was needed to hang on to government because of the alternative. So that's the one argument. But the flip side is, I watched Morrison pivot to Biden almost immediately. Now, this was after Trump put on that incredible state dinner at the White House. Miranda Devine called it an enchanted evening. It was. Trump really threw out the welcome mat, and yet Morrison, in some ways threw Trump under the bus and
really did.
Couldn't get a hold of Biden quick enough, has moved our nation, in the direction of what would be acceptable in the Biden globalist world, net zero emissions by 2050. That's all come out since the US presidential election. I think this appeasement globally. Domestically, the inability to have a fight on freedom of speech and freedom of religion. These are core values of the Liberal Party. And I think we've got to stand up. I think we've gone past the stage where we can appease the leftist cultural Marxist agenda.
100%.
And if the Liberal Party won't do it, someone else will. And now, look, I'm a supporter of the Liberal Party. I want them to do well. I think Matt Canavan and others standing up on the energy debate is really, really important, but we've got to have the fight. And I'll finish with this because, there's a great line in that Churchill movie about Winston Churchill that came out 3 years ago, and I don't know whether this quote is apocryphal or not, but he said, "You can't negotiate with a tiger when your head is in its mouth." And I think that's where we are as conservatives with the power that the left have. They've just used raw power to grab a US election. The tech oligarchs use raw power. Raw power is being deployed at us, and we're not even up for the fight. And I think that's the problem. Yeah,
absolutely. The compromise can't happen anymore because we've got to understand the rules of the game. And the rules of the game were articulated by Saul Alinsky in his Rules for Radicals. And there's a whole lot of complexity to that, but one of them is observable in effect that the left will take 10 steps forward, aggressive, radical, and then they will pretend that they are being generous by taking 9 steps back. But it's always this one radical step, one after another. And We don't take ground back. We just concede a little bit at a time. We concede 10, and then and sometimes we don't even take any ground back when we're in government.
Can I just ask Damian, and I'm sorry I gave a long answer to Damian, but
now you're taking my time.
I'm taking Dave's time, but I have a theory, and I want to test this with you, that if our people, and I know stacks of people in the Liberal Party and the National who believe all the things that we're talking about tonight, but because of the hostility of the media, just don't put their head above the parapet. If our values and views were advocated for in the public square, would Australians come with us? We're talking, you've got to do this to maintain power. But is that right? If we actually fought for the things we believed in, is there a constituency out there that would go, yeah, no, that's right, but they just never hear it because of the filtering of the mainstream media and the suppression? Yeah,
I totally agree with you on that, and I think it was Andrew Breitbart who started Breitbart News, and now Andrew Breitbart, love him or hate him, he was very controversial, but his philosophy was, and I think Trump adopted his philosophy through Steve Bannon. He had two philosophies. The first one was attention first, message second. So you've got to grab the attention, hold the attention, do whatever it takes. If you say something completely outrageous, great. And that's what Trump did. So he would say something completely outrageous and do what Dave just said and pull it back, right? So that sort of goes to Trump's negotiating style as well. But I think what Breitbart was saying was, you've got to get the eyeballs first. So you've got to get that attention, and we don't have the platform because the mainstream media is, it really is quite left wing. I mean, even the Australian and at times can be sucked into that, and the Murdoch press as well. So there's that. And then the other thing that Breitbart said, which I think is even more important, is that politics is downstream of culture. And I've said this to everybody that I've met since I've come back to Australia in the Liberal Party. If we don't get our hands on the culture, we have lost the culture war. We're not just losing, we've lost. It's been going for 50 years, and we are way, way out of the mix. And I'm not talking about, social conservatives, like you guys. I'm talking about even, I would be probably moderate on the social spectrum. I'm pretty conservative on the economic spectrum. But we've lost even that. I mean, there's no argument. There's nobody putting the case for free market economics or capitalism. Capitalism is a dirty word. Right wing is a dirty word. Conservative is a dirty word. Someone calls you a right wing or a conservative, it's used as a slur. And that's a problem, right? So that tells you where we are culturally. And so the first thing that you've got to do when you've got power, or you win power unexpectedly, like we did, or ScoMo did back in 2019, is you've got to deal with the culture. So the first two things that we need to get to are the ABC and education.
Yep.
And they've got to be fixed first, because if you don't deal with that, it's no good handing out all the how to vote cards you like at the ballot box. You're never going to win because you don't own the cultural discourse. So you can't even get your ideas, as Lyle just said, you can't get your ideas out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hear you, and I totally think the focus is on the wrong place. The party really does have to find a strong leader. And I'm not saying ScoMo is not great, but we need other people at the back maybe that are coming in on the conservative side from that give them license to go out and, like the National Party, use the National Party leadership properly. Get other conservatives like Dutton out to sort of push different conservative positions, and then ScoMo can be the kind of the Big Mac of it all, the bland burger that everybody's happy to buy. Yeah.
The Church and State Summit is really going to be tackling all of these questions in depth. And to answer your question about, can someone like Lyle Shelton get elected? Can Christian values, policies, without the devotion to God, just the values, can they be a successful election platform, or should we compromise? The answer is we should never, ever, ever, ever concede an inch on Christian values. These is the foundation that flourishing societies are built on. This is the foundation that Australia was built on. What we have to have is a realistic appraisal of where we are now, how we got here, and how we then get out of this situation. I used to be a part owner in a personal training studio, not a personal trainer, but I listened to them and their training sessions and the philosophies that they used in the science of personal health. And one of the things that we were completely opposed to was fad diets. And I will use the metaphor that that's pretty much like expecting change in an election cycle and then expecting that change to stick. So we would say to clients, look, if you came in here morbidly obese, how many years did it take you to get that way? And in our metaphor, it's taken culture maybe 50 to 70 years to get here where we are today in a toxic, postmodern, there is no truth, if it feels good, do it, relativistic, nihilist society. Since the 50s probably, with the Frankfurt School, it's been just this 10 steps forward, 9 steps back, 10 steps forward, 9 steps back, 10 steps forward, 9 steps back, for decades upon decades upon decades. To expect a solution in one fad diet or one election cycle is just silly. We have to be in this for the long run. It is going to take a generation to change. We should always be looking for what we can do more, like stop binge eating ice cream every night, to use you have to stop doing the toxic things straight away. But it is going to take a while to change the ship of culture, to turn us around into a place. So we cannot compromise, but it is going to take a while for us to build enough of an army of grassroots support, which is the only way to achieve lasting change in our parliaments, to build grassroots support for really good people who will not compromise, who will not be transactional and pragmatic, but who will say right is right, wrong is wrong, and halfway between right and wrong is half wrong, not the centre. It's just half wrong. And that's not good enough for our parliament. It's not good enough for our neighbours. It's not good enough for our nation. I want to segue onto our ad break from here and talk about just have another little promo. Hopefully the audio is not terrible for this, for the Church and State Summit. And then we're going to talk about Rush Limbaugh and the star of the next clip, which is Senator Matt Canavan. So let me just see if I can get this playing here. We got it muted. Let me come back. I will unmute
along to the Church and State Summit in Brisbane. Hi, I'm Senator Matt Canavan, a Senator for Queensland, and I'm really looking forward to coming along to the Church and State Summit in Brisbane and down in Logan on the 26th and 27th of February. It's really important that we as faith people, as Christians, continue to advocate for issues in the public space, especially as more and more people are not subscribing to the Christian faith. So it's even more important that the number of Christians in our society are making their voice heard in our community. I want to speak a little bit next week about how we must protect the family unit and support families, support Australians who want to start a family, especially through our tax system, so we don't disadvantage family formation. I'm looking forward to meeting many of you next week, because we've got to keep the conversation up and work together. So make sure we have better policies in this country to support families and make a better Australia.
And a huge thank you to Senator Matt Canavan for coming to speak to the Church and State Summit, as well as Senator Amanda Stoker. It's going to be great to have a lineup of politicians. And something I articulate when I invite politicians to the summit is they're not invited because I support their party or their politics. And I would love to have some Labor members. I'm certainly not opposed to that at all. But what I really want is people who are experts, people who have something to teach us about policy and about Christianity and about culture. Because that's the whole purpose of the summit, is to actually start this ratchet back in the favor of truth, justice, and peace and liberty. It's not about right versus left for me. It's actually about right versus wrong, and about democracy versus tyranny, and where a virtuous people get to govern instead of an immoral and, well, frankly, unvirtuous people.
Well, mate, it's great that you've got Matt Canavan coming. Damian mentioned the indoctrination of the next generation through the education system and the ABC. Matt Canavan has been one of the great champions of the family, and he talked about the economics of that in that little clip there. So I'm hoping he's going to dust off the work that he did some years ago about the couple penalty in the tax system against mums and dads, where where a parent wants to stay at home and look after the kids in their formative years are taxed disadvantaged to the tune of $10,000 a year. So good on you, Matt Canavan. Part of the Conservative fight back is
the least we can do.
Inform families and bring them up in ways where they'll love their country and not hate their country, which is what the ABC and the education system tells them to do.
Damian, I want you to talk to us briefly, I guess, because I want to move on to Matt's views and nuclear energy. But talk to us about Rush Limbaugh. We're, I guess, celebrating his life today, which has come to a close.
Yes. So Rush Limbaugh was an American conservative radio broadcaster, and he died at the age of 70 today after a long struggle with lung cancer. Actually, it wasn't that long, actually. I think he was only diagnosed about a year or so ago, but I'm not quite sure how long he did struggle with it, but it was well publicized over the past year or so. There've been a lot of people talking about Rush. I certainly didn't agree with everything that Rush said. He was pretty tough. But when you hear people in the broadcasting industry who grew up with him, I mean, I know John Laws was a keen Rush Limbaugh listener, and I'm pretty sure that Alan Jones was influenced by him as well. I don't think there are too many conservative commentators anywhere in the world, in the English-speaking world, that weren't influenced by Rush. He was an exceptionally good quality broadcaster, just technically. I mean, his ability was extraordinary to capture people. But I think what strikes me about Rush more than anything, love him or hate him, he was able to connect with people. He understood that the medium of radio in particular, but certainly all broadcasting, it's very intimate. We're in people's living rooms, we're in their houses, we're in their cars, we're in their kitchens, and it's a one-on-one medium. And therefore, you have to be authentic, and you have to speak from the heart. You have to talk about what you actually believe. And he was able to do that. And he was also able to give people a script, in a sense, that they could use to have conversations with their relatives, helping, I think, and this is our role as broadcasters, it's to help people form the ideas and the language and the words that they need to have the conversations, right? Using our skills as communicators, I guess, to sort of articulate things that are in your head. So, people would listen to Rush and love him, I think, because of that. They could sort of be listening to him and think, oh, he's saying all the things that I think, and putting it in simple terms that I can explain to other people in the way that I speak, in the way that I talk. And he was the original golden microphone before John Laws. So his wife did the announcement today on air on the Rush Limbaugh show, and she basically opened the show by saying, I'm not the Limbaugh that you tune into and listen to every day. And I very much wish Rush was behind the microphone right now, the golden microphone, like he was for over 32 years. But she said, I must share with you directly that our beloved Rush, my wonderful husband, passed away this morning due to complications from lung cancer. Oh. And we've seen, the typical disgusting response from the left and, attacking him on Twitter today. There were some things he did in his career that I found quite horrible. And people have talked about that on Twitter today. That's fine. If you want to raise and talk about some of those things, I guess another day might be better, but if they want to do it today, fair enough. But I think you've also got to look at the wider context of the guy and what he achieved and And certainly from the position of conservatives, I heard Newt Gingrich, Mark Levin, all sorts of people, Tucker Carlson today talking about him and how much he influenced the community. So, yeah, inspiring stuff, but very, very sad that America's lost a great conservative thinker and icon today.
I think he was Twitter before there was Twitter. You know, he really kind of got those discussions going, and he fired people up. And it's interesting to see the reaction from some circles. Like when he was given the Medal of Freedom in the 2020 State of the Union address, watch the clip again, and you'll see that Melania Trump is putting the Medal of Freedom on him. And Trump and Pence are up on their feet giving him an ovation. And Nancy Pelosi is in the back kind of, you know, just the whole visual of that is just that in one photo sums up America today.
Yep. Yep. And I think, you know, they used to call Alan Jones, you know, the Rush Limbaugh of Australia, as if it was a slur. Alan Jones also somebody with whom throughout my career I did agree with on everything, but what an extraordinary broadcaster. At 80 years old, still going. And up until last year was getting up every day at 3 o'clock in the morning. I did that for 6 years of my radio career. I couldn't do it at 50 years of age, let alone at 80 years of age. So these guys care about what they're talking about. They're passionate. And I don't think, you know, I say to people on the centre left and left, if there's anyone out there from that persuasion watching this show, but you know, think about these things before you write people off and ask yourself, what are they really, you know, they can't be coming from a place of evil, you know. And I think that's probably how we're going to heal and get that unity thing going. If we can understand the underlying interests that we're all coming from and what we all want, then we can compromise on the details and we can have a nation, have a society that functions well. But if we don't do that, then it's very, very difficult. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk about a very Australian issue right now. But before we do, I want to say good night to, I think I've lost my mouse is going. Oh, there it is. No, yep. Second screen. Sorry, technical hassles. Thank you very much to Ray Rudowski for coming on. Not Q&A tonight. It's been a pleasure having you, Ray.
Thanks for having me. I think it was a great discussion.
Yeah, good on you, Ray.
We'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Hopefully, not too long away.
I look forward to it.
So we have Matt Canavan. Let's have a look at exactly what he has said. Coalition MPs in drive for nuclear energy. Nationals senators have drafted legislation allowing the Clean Energy Finance Corporation to invest in nuclear power as 2/3 of coalition MPs backed lifting the ban. What 1/3 had their head in their pocket that said no to that? Lifting the ban on the controversial fuel source to help shift the nation to a carbon neutral future. Genius. The bloc of 5 national senators, led by Bridget McKenzie and Matt Canavan, will move an amendment to legislation establishing a $1 billion arm at the Green Bank to allow it to invest in nuclear generators, high energy, low emissions, coal-fired power stations, and carbon capture and storage technology. The Nationals' move comes as a survey of 71 coalition backbenchers conducted by the Australian revealed that 48 were in favour of lifting the long-standing prohibition on nuclear power in the EPBC Act. What are you smoking if you're not supporting nuclear energy? If you're looking for reliable, affordable, clean, virtually zero emissions energy, how can you not be looking at nuclear?
Well, you can't. And I guess there's even a bigger question behind this. What have we been smoking in that we think we can power a modern industrialized economy on wind and solar? You just can't. And the snowstorm in Texas this week has shown this. You've got Germany building coal-fired power stations to firm up their wind and solar. It's not a reliable method now.
And even if it was reliable, it's devastating for the environment.
Well, there's all of
the
that.
mining to create the production, and then the devastation wherever they're installed.
You've got to pack them up after a few years and
10-year lifespan.
Dispose of them.
Yep.
It's very inefficient. Yet we're continually told how renewables are cheaper. Well, they're not if you consider the lifespan issues, if you consider the extra transmission that you've got to put in place, if you consider the backup fuels and resources that go into that. Look, we have been sabotaging the economics of our country for the last 20 years as this terrible climate debate has gone on and on. I'm in the Beyond Lomberg school. Okay, if there's a problem, let's deal with it. But it would seem like the cure is far worse. And so we've got ourselves into a hole now where we can't have coal. The Greens don't want us to even have gas. And so the only option left, is for the Nats now to raise this nuclear issue. If we don't, we're facing an existential crisis as a country. This has become an issue of national security. The Chinese are building 127 coal-fired power stations as we speak. They have nuclear, and yet we're expected to exist off CCP-made windmills and solar panels. I think it's a joke, and I think good on the Nats for pushing this. The trouble is, and sorry, Damian, and Dave, but there's probably a 10-year lead time between now and when we could get our first nuclear plant operating. We probably need to build some coal-fired power stations in the meantime. Yeah. Or some big gas, but preferably coal, because we've got transmission lines next to coal deposits now, rather than trying to have to, further bastardize the energy grid with gas, wind, and solar. Let's just keep going with some clean coal and then look at nuclear in the long term. This is where did it go? Just lost the graphic. Here we go. Nuclear ban. What the coalition backbenchers say: 1 against, 48 in favour. Yeah, the one against was Senator Paul Scar, but I think that's a soft against. I think he'll come around. Senator Paul Scar from Queensland. I think he may not have understood the question, maybe. Misunderstanding the question is the kindest thing you could possibly say to that, that response. I think Senator Scar will be fine. Look, before we get to you, Damian, let's read what Liberal MPs, Andrew Laming, John Alexander and Jared Rennick, 2 very good Queensland MPs, among backbenchers who want Scott Morrison to take a repeal of the nuclear ban to the upcoming election. Of course, I don't even know how this isn't super easy. Just do it. Just repeal it. A move that would open a new divide with Labor. Imagine distinguishing ourselves from a hard left as the nation sets a course for a low emissions future. I'm very keen to see the prohibition lifted, Mr. Laming said. It's something that has to be taken to an election so Australians realise there is a significant change in energy policy. Mr. Alexander said it was like trying to fight Muhammad Ali with one arm tied behind your back if you're going to ignore nuclear energy. Damian.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not going to provide much entertaining television for you tonight, because I completely agree with everything Lyle said, 150%, and with you, Dave. So, look, nuclear is the question that you can throw at your friends who are climate change activists to work out whether or not they really care about the planet. The question you ask them is simply, do you support nuclear power? If the answer is no, then they're defying science. Yep. They're defying logic and common sense. All about ideology. And they can't possibly believe that the planet's going to end in 12 years because, nuclear is certainly not going to cause that if we use it in the appropriate way. It's safe now. The technology is safe, safer than it's ever been. There are all sorts of different kinds of nuclear fuels that can be used. If you talk to anybody with an engineering background, anyone I know with an engineering background who knows more about these things than I do will tell you, even left-wing engineers that I know have told me that they support nuclear energy. So the idea that we can't have nuclear is just ridiculous. I agree with Lyle in that we're going to have to build some coal-fired power plants, or at least get some renovations done to the old ones or something, or whatever you do with them, but we need them. We've got to have something there. And the idea that us not going ahead with a couple of plants, even coal plants, in the face of what China's doing with 127 plants being built. I think the Philippines are building 30 or 40. Most other countries are building, several more. I mean, you can't say, it's just ridiculous. And I guess it's circular, isn't it? We're going back to the same old thing. Obviously, I don't know what Paul Scar was thinking. I hear very, very, very positive things about Paul Scar, so I'm surprised to see that. The others, I don't know what they were thinking, but this could be the solution to the debate in terms of the whole, the climate change thing, which terrifies politicians all around the world. Conservative politicians are scared witless of this climate change debate, and that's because, again, we've lost the cultural argument on it.
Yeah.
And we maybe didn't do a very good job on it. I don't know, in explaining or compromising on things. It's not a black and white issue. It's very, very complicated. And, the solutions are complicated, but nuclear is one solution that's not very complicated. It's straight up, it clearly works.
Agreed.
Well, it's a long-term solution, as we've just said. And there is, I think, a crisis looming in the short to medium term because we haven't reinvested in baseload power in this country. And, when you've got the Australian energy market operator talking about the serious possibility of blackouts in New South Wales as a result of the imminent closure of Liddell, you had the owner of the Vale power station in New South Wales saying, well, they're not going to invest because of all the uncertainty. You've got Matt Keane, the New South Wales Environment Minister, running around saying, well, we're not going to have, any false, he doesn't even want to have the gas-fired power stations that Angus Taylor, the Energy Minister, and Scott Morrison are proposing. So
to be fair, gas is a whole lot more expensive in Australia than it is in America.
Well, I don't think gas is the answer either. And I'm concerned about Scott Morrison's proposal to use gas as the baseload ingredient.
Yeah.
You think about the Hunter Valley. The Port of Newcastle is the world's largest coal export.
Gas is the answer to people who just hate coal.
Well, and this is the problem because, as Damian said, we've lost this sort of cultural war. I'm going to call it a cultural war over the environment. I'm not sure it's a scientific issue.
That's right.
It's this idea of pantheism. We worship the planet, and somehow we've got to. But the fact that we can't build another coal-fired power station in the Hunter Valley, which is what Matt Canavan is saying we need to do, and the idea that we'd build a gas-fired power station somewhere in the Hunter Valley and pipe the gas from Narrabri or Queensland,
insane.
It just doesn't make any sense. So, look, and you've got on the left of politics, Joel Fitzgibbon worried about his seat there. Now he's saying, talking a big game on coal, and it's a great export industry, and there's an industry of the big future. But not even Joel Fitzgibbon is saying, let's have a coal-fired power station in Australia. So, look, I think, yes, let's get the nuclear thing on the table, but we've still got an existential threat. And the final thing I'd say on this is, this is not an issue of the environment anymore. I think the debate has got to be reframed as a national security issue. I mean, China is making itself strong economically. Yep. We are making ourselves weak economically because we are following this globalist agenda, but the Chinese aren't. And I think that's, the sooner we wake up to this, let's, a bit of CO2 in the atmosphere may or may not be hurting things, but I tell you what is hurting Australia, and that will be the loss of our manufacturing base and continuing high electricity prices for consumers.
Yep, very good. Yeah. Damian, final words from you.
Look, we're living in la-la land. We've got to wake up. It's Australia needs to get its act together. We're sitting here thinking, I think Lyle said earlier, we're spoiled by what we've got. There are just so many levels on which we need to wake up to the threat that faces us from China primarily, but generally, even from ourselves, if we don't start to really kind of get our act together. Energy is a security issue. Lyle's 100% right, and we do need to reframe it as that and start talking about it in that way. It's absolutely a security issue because it powers our economy. I mean, if we don't, it's not. I've got a solar panel on my roof. We could have solar panels on everybody's roofs, and we'd have enough power for our domestic needs. but it's not the domestic needs, it's our industry. And our security is very much tied to our economic success as well as to our industry. And so we just have to wake up, we have to get sensible, we have to stop appeasing and even paying attention to the crazies in Extinction Rebellion. We need to talk to moderate environmentalists and come up with sensible, balanced solutions. And we need leadership on that from the Liberal Party. If we can't get it from the Liberal Party, we need it from the National Party. I applaud this move. I applaud that survey, and I hope that it sorts everything out and we start being a bit more sensible.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for tonight. Really appreciate your intelligent conversation and Ray's contribution to 97% of the show as well. And also big thank you to the viewer who's been watching and joining in live with your comments. I know that you enjoy seeing each other's comments from different YouTube channels and different Facebook channels. I think we're live across sometimes 5 to 8 different social media outlets, and you sharing it and just engaging in the conversation with us is really great. We are not an echo chamber. The echo chamber is the mainstream media, where one side of the conversation is entitled to have the other side of the conversation is the solution. If you'd like to help produce more of sensible conversation like this with right thinking, please head to goodsource.news, click on the banner on the menu item to support and become a monthly supporter. It is free for everybody. As much as possible for as long as possible. But we do need your support to continue. We don't get to feed our family on love and sunshine. They actually need Weet-Bix and the occasional meat on the table as well. Equipment costs money, and there's a lot of other consumable things that need to happen. And so, of course, a huge appreciation to the Good Source supporters who so regularly, faithfully and generously do put their hand in their pocket and just chip in for $5, $10 or $20 a week or a month. You guys make this happen, and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you very much. Don't forget to head to the Church and State website, churchandstate.com.au, to see the videos from the speakers that are coming up. Make sure you come along. I'm sure there's only about 30 or so seats left now. We've got limited capacity, and they're nearly all gone. End of next week, begins Friday next week, but we've got unlimited seats online. We're going to have a really great professional broadcast live, and all of those videos will be available delayed stream download as well. So if you can't watch the whole conference live, the one price will get you live and download those videos as well. So 14 sessions over 2 days. It's a great kind of content you're not going to want to miss. And to say goodnight, we're going to have one more preview to give you a sneak peek of why you want to come along to the Church and State Summit online or in person, 26th and 27th of February.
I'm Angela Porker. I'm a newborn photographer, as well as the founder of the After the Abortion Photography series. I know right now you're asking yourself, why is a newborn photographer one of the speakers for the Church and State Summit? Well, I would like to share with you my amazing journey of following God when it doesn't make sense. I went from missionary to newborn photographer to the founder of 2 photography ministries that would go on to reach millions of people around the world. And I would like to focus on the After the Abortion Photography series. I know that abortion is kind of a taboo subject. It's kind of hard to know how to approach it because people feel so strongly about it, either for it or against it. Well, did you know that many post-aborted women and men regret their abortions? God has shown me that their stories are key to changing people's hearts about abortion. And through my series of photos, they're able to express the deep remorse and the guilt and the suffering that they experienced after their abortion, as well as the healing that they found in Jesus. These photos are shocking and raw and real, And they're reaching people around the world on both sides of the fence. So come and join with me as I share how God uses ordinary things and ordinary people to do extraordinary things for Him.